Ash fell like snow over the Vesper stronghold in the ancient city of Vesperfall. Inside the obsidian courtyard, 300 vampires stood in silence beneath a sky that hadn't seen sunlight in 50 years, watching the stone bier that held Prince Lucian Vesper. The prince's body lay perfectly still beneath a pane of enchanted glass. His pale face, framed by silver-white hair, looked carved rather than dead, like a saint sculpted from marble by reverent hands. Too beautiful, too perfect, too much like a trap. Lord Alistair Vesper stood at the head of the bier, his presence a cold weight that pressed against every soul in the courtyard. He hadn't wept. Vampire kings didn't weep, not even for the son, who was supposed to rule after them. His hand rested on the stone edge, the same hand that had signed execution orders and held a throne for 3 centuries. Now it curled into a fist. Blessed night, we return this soul to your eternal embrace. The high priest's voice echoed off the fortress walls, resonant and final. 6 royal guards stepped forward in perfect formation, their armor black as the stone beneath their feet. They lifted the bier with synchronized precision. The procession began its slow march toward the crypt gates, where Lucian would be sealed in enchanted stone for eternity. Behind Alistair, the court followed, nobles in mourning gray, council members with shuttered expressions, warriors with swords sheathed in respect. No one spoke. Even breathing felt like blasphemy. Thunder rolled across the mountains. The torches lining the courtyard walls flickered. Alistair walked behind his son's body, each step measured, controlled. The picture of authority, even in grief. His crimson eyes never left the bier. That's when the screaming started. Stop. Every head turned. Through the fortress gates stumbled a girl, wild-eyed, mud-streaked, her torn cloak barely clinging to bony shoulders. Her bare feet slapped against the obsidian as she ran, leaving wet prints behind. Tangled brown hair stuck to a face mapped with exhaustion and something sharper than desperation. 2 guards moved instantly to block her path. He's not dead, she shrieked, fighting against the iron grip on her arms. Please, you can't. You have to listen. The prince, he's alive. Remove her, someone hissed from the crowd. But Alistair raised one hand. Something in the girl's voice stopped him cold. Not the madness the court heard. Not the hysteria. It was the certainty, terrible and absolute, that made his red eyes fix on her face as the guards held her between them like a captured animal. What did you say? His voice was quiet. Deadly. The kind of quiet that preceded executions. The girl stopped struggling. Rain and ash dripped from her chin as she met his gaze without flinching, without the fear that turned most mortals to stone in his presence. Your son is breathing, Lord Vesper. I felt it. Her voice steadied, turning sharp despite the trembling in her limbs. I've been watching from the gatehouse for an hour. His chest moved. I swear it. She's insane. A council member spat. Our prince has passed beyond the veil. How dare this wretch defile? I know what death feels like, the girl interrupted, and for a moment her voice carried the weight of something older than her years. I've felt it since I was a child. It's like cold water in my bones, like silence pressing on my ears. And that, she pointed at the bier with a shaking hand, that isn't death. The courtyard erupted. Nobles shouted for her removal. A guard called for chains. The high priest stepped forward, his ancient face flushed with outrage at the interrupted rite. But Alistair's eyes never left the homeless girl. He had ruled the vampire kingdom for 300 years by reading souls. Knowing when they lied, when they feared, when they plotted. This girl wasn't lying. She was terrified, yes, but not of him. She was terrified of being wrong, of what it would mean if she stayed silent. Open the bier. The words fell like stones into water. The crowd gasped as if he'd struck them. A council member grabbed his arm. My lord, the priest pronounced him. I said open it. The 3 elite guards positioned around the bier exchanged glances. Dorian Hale, duty-bound and rigid as the sword at his hip. Marcus Crow, battle-scarred and suspicious, his hand twitching toward his blade. Elias Thorne, silent and watchful, his dark eyes unreadable. None of them moved. Now. The command left no room for interpretation. No space for doubt. Dorian and Marcus stepped forward. Their hands moved to the enchanted locks, ancient mechanisms that required blood to open. The seals clicked free with sounds like breaking bones. The glass panel lifted. For one suspended breath, nothing. Lucian lay exactly as they'd arranged him at dawn, hands folded across his chest, silver crown removed, dressed in the formal robes of his station. Gone. At peace. Beyond reach. Then his chest rose. It was barely there, the slightest expansion, like a whisper of wind caught in fabric. But it was there. Merciful night, someone breathed. Alistair's hand shot to his son's throat, fingers pressing against skin that should have been stone cold. He felt it. Faint, irregular, weak as a dying ember. A pulse. Get the healers. Alistair's voice cracked through the courtyard like thunder. Move. Chaos exploded. Vampires surged forward. Nobles screamed. Torches toppled. The priest staggered backward, prayers dying on his lips. Marcus scooped Lucian from the bier with shocking gentleness, cradling the prince against his armored chest. Dorian barked orders, his sword suddenly drawn, pushing back the press of bodies. Elias melted into the shadows, already moving to secure the path to the stronghold. Alistair stood frozen for one heartbeat, staring at the empty bier where his son had lain. Then his eyes found the girl across the chaos. She stood alone, ignored in the frenzy. Tears streaked through the ash on her face. Relief and terror warred in her expression, the look of someone who'd just stopped the world from ending and had no idea what came next. You, Alistair said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. What's your name? The girl swallowed hard. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the sudden hush of vampires, watching their king, it carried. Clara. Clara Bennett. Alistair stared at her for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then he turned to the nearest guard. Bring her. The fortress swallowed them whole. Marcus carried Lucian through corridors that had stood for 1,000 years, his boots echoing against black marble while priests scrambled behind him, arguing in frantic whispers about divine law and disrupted rites. Nobles poured through the gates like a flood, their voices rising into a cacophony of panic and accusation. Clara stumbled between 2 guards, their grip bruising her arms. The world tilted around her, towering walls carved with scenes of ancient battles, iron sconces burning with flames that cast no heat, doorways tall enough for giants. Everything felt wrong. Too cold. Too vast. Too immortal. They dragged her into a circular chamber where torchlight glinted off surgical instruments arranged with brutal precision. The infirmary. Marcus laid Lucian on a stone table in the center, and immediately 3 healers in gray robes descended on him like ravens on carrion. Clara tried to move closer, but the guards yanked her back. She shouldn't be here, Dorian Hale said, his voice sharp as the blade still drawn in his hand. He stood rigid near the doorway, every inch the perfect soldier. She interrupted a royal rite, defiled sacred ground. By law, that demands execution. She saved the prince. Marcus growled without looking away from Lucian's still form. His scarred hands flexed at his sides. If she hadn't, we wouldn't be asking how she knew. Dorian's eyes were flint. Mortal women don't sense death in vampires. She's either a spy or a witch. Either way, she needs interrogation before she disappears into the cells. Or a grave, Marcus added darkly. Clara's breath caught. She'd known crashing the funeral was reckless. Suicidal, even. But hearing them discuss her execution so casually, like debating the weather, made her knees buckle. Elias Thorne leaned against the far wall, silent as a shadow. His dark eyes studied her with unsettling focus, reading something she couldn't name. He hadn't spoken once since the courtyard. Somehow that was more frightening than the threats. Silence. Lord Alistair's voice cut through the argument like winter wind. He stood at the head of the stone table, staring down at his son with an expression that could have been carved from the same rock. His crimson eyes swept to Clara. Keep her here. My lord, Dorian began. She stays. until we know what we're dealing with. Alistair's gaze pinned the guard in place. If she knows what afflicts him, I need her to be conscious and able to speak. Not rotting in a cell. Not kindness, Clara realized. Necessity. She was a tool. Nothing more. The healers worked with clinical precision, peeling back Lucian's burial robes to examine pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Clara watched from her position between the guards, her eyes tracking every detail. Heartbeat present, but irregular, one healer announced. Pulse weak. No response to stimuli. He's been pronounced dead for 12 hours, another muttered. This should be impossible. But Clara saw what they didn't. Or maybe what they refused to see. She pulled against the guard's grip, leaning forward. His skin. Be silent, Dorian snapped. His skin is wrong. Clara's voice cracked with urgency. It's cold, but not death cold. And look at his eyelids, they're moving. Like he's dreaming. That's not a corpse. That's stasis. The head healer, an ancient vampire with silver threading through his black hair, turned slowly to look at her. His expression shifted from dismissal to something sharper. Colder. What did you say? Stasis. The word came out on instinct, dredged up from some memory she couldn't place. Her mother's voice, maybe, from years ago in the few moments before fever took her. Listen for the space between Clara. Life and death aren't the only options. He's trapped between living and dying. Something's holding him there. She took a shaking breath. Night grave essence. The infirmary went silent. Every vampire in the room recoiled as if she'd screamed a curse. The healers stepped back from the table. Marcus's hand went to his sword. Even Elias straightened from the wall, his perpetual calm fracturing. Impossible, the head healer whispered, but his hands trembled. Nightgrave hasn't been seen in 200 years. It's forbidden. A treason artifact that can only be brewed inside stronghold wards. Alistair finished, his voice deadly quiet. His knuckles went white where they gripped the edge of the table. Under blood-sealed protections, the implications settled over the room like ash. Someone inside the fortress had poisoned the prince. Someone with access to the deepest vaults. Someone close enough to touch Lucian's food, his drink, his very life. Someone in this room, perhaps. Marcus's eyes swept the healers with naked suspicion. Dorian's jaw clenched so tight Clara heard his teeth grind. Elias watched them all with the patience of a predator. How does a homeless mortal know the name of a poison lost to history? Dorian's question came out like an accusation and a threat combined. Clara opened her mouth, but had no answer. She didn't know. The word had simply appeared in her mind, certain as her own heartbeat. Before anyone could press further, Lucian's had turned. Just a fraction.
Just barely.
But in the frozen stillness of the infirmary, it was as loud as thunder. His eyelids cracked open, thin slivers revealing irises that burned like fresh blood in firelight.
Red.
Glowing.
Alive.
The healers gasped and stumbled backward. Lucian's lips parted. His chest rose with effort, pulling in air that rattled through his lungs like wind through a crypt. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible, a whisper scraped across stones. Clara. Every eye in the room snapped to her. Clara's heart stopped. She'd never told him her name. She'd never spoken to him at all. He'd been unconscious, dead, or close enough, when she'd screamed her way into his funeral. He should know her name. He couldn't. But his unfocused red eyes searched the room until they found her face, and something like recognition flickered there before his lids fell closed again. Alistair turned to face Clara fully, and the weight of his attention felt like standing beneath an avalanche, waiting to fall. "Who?" he said softly. "Are you?" They moved her to a windowless chamber deep in the fortress, where the walls pressed close and the air tasted like iron. No chains, but the door was solid oak reinforced with steel, and 2 guards stood outside. Clara sat on a wooden stool in the center of the room, illuminated by a single torch that cast her shadow long and trembling across the floor. Lord Alistair entered like winter itself, the 3 elite guards flanking him. Dorian closed the door with a sound like a coffin ceiling. Marcus positioned himself between Clara and the exit. Elias leaned against the wall, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Speak," Alistair commanded. "Not a request. A law of nature." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She'd survived the streets by knowing when to fight and when to fold. This was folding time. "My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 20 years old. I've been homeless since I was 8. The words came out steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. "I've lived in Vesperfall my whole life. The alleys near the East Gate, mostly. Sometimes the old church ruins when winter gets bad." "That doesn't explain how you knew," Marcus growled. "Mortal women don't sense vampire death. They don't know the names of forbidden poisons." "I don't know how I knew." Clara looked up, meeting Alistair's crimson gaze despite every survival instinct telling her to lower her eyes. "I've always felt death. Since I was a child. It's like hearing a note that nobody else can hear. A coldness that settles in my chest when something dies nearby." "Convenient," Dorian said coldly. "A beggar with magical sensitivity. Found at precisely the right moment to save the prince." "You think I planned this?" Clara's voice cracked between fear and disbelief. "I've been sleeping in gutters and stealing bread to survive. Why would I throw myself into a vampire funeral if I wanted to live through the week?" "To gain favor," Marcus suggested darkly. "To infiltrate the court. To position yourself near the throne." "I don't want to be here." The words burst out of her. "I wanted to walk past your gates and never think about vampires again. But I felt him, your prince, and I knew if I stayed silent, you'd bury someone alive. So I'm sorry I interrupted your sacred rites, but I'm not sorry I screamed." Silence fell like a blade. Alistair studied her for a long moment. "Your mother. Tell me about her." Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that. "She died when I was 8. Fever, the street doctors said." But the memory rose unbidden. Her mother in the abandoned boarding house, skin gray as ash, eyes bright with delirium. "Before she died, she kept saying strange things, that I needed to listen for souls. That death had a sound, and I could hear it. She made me promise never to ignore it, even if it scared me. They'll call you cursed, Clara. They'll call you worse.
But you listen anyway.
You listen and you run or you save them. Promise me." Clara had promised. And then her mother had closed her eyes and the cold had settled in Clara's chest, that terrible, final silence that meant the soul had gone. She'd been hearing it ever since. "She was raving," Dorian said dismissively. "Fever madness." But Elias spoke for the first time, his voice quiet and deliberate. "What did it feel like? When you sensed the prince?" Clara turned to him, surprised by the question. No accusation in his tone, just curiosity, like hearing music underwater.
Distant.
Muffled.
But there.
Everyone else heard silence, but I heard something. A heartbeat where there shouldn't be one. Elias's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. "She's lying," Marcus insisted. "This is infiltration. Espionage. We should interrogate her properly." "Enough." Alistair's words cut through the argument. He hadn't taken his eyes off Clara. "Whether she's a spy or savior, the prince spoke her name. Until he wakes, and we understand why, she stays under guard, confined to quarters. No contact with the court." "My lord," Dorian protested, "if she's part of the conspiracy, then keeping her close makes more sense than throwing her in a cell where co-conspirators could silence her." Alistair's logic was cold and perfect. "She's both witness and suspect. She doesn't leave this wing. The 3 of you rotate shifts watching her. If she tries to run, kill her." Clara's stomach dropped. "If she tries to contact anyone outside these walls, kill her. If she so much as breathes wrong." "I understand," Clara whispered. Alistair nodded once, then swept from the room like a storm passing. Marcus followed immediately, shooting Clara a look that promised violence. Dorian lingered a moment, his jaw tight. "You interrupted sacred rites," he said quietly. "Punishment for that is death. The only reason you're breathing is because the prince spoke your name. Don't mistake mercy for trust." Then he was gone. Only Elias remained, still leaning against the wall. He watched her with that unsettling focus, like he could see through skin to bone. "You're not lying," he said finally. "But you're not telling everything either." Clara swallowed hard. "I've told you what I know. Not what you know. What you felt." Elias pushed off the wall, moving with predatory grace toward the door. "You felt something else when you touched that casket. Something that scared you more than us."
He was right.
She had felt something. A darkness coiled around Lucian's soul like chains, pulling him down into nothing. Hungry. Intentional.
Wrong.
But before she could answer, Elias was gone. They gave her a room 3 doors down from the infirmary, barely larger than a cell, with a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single torch mounted on the wall. The door had no lock on the inside. Clara collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally crashing over her. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd saved a prince and become a prisoner in the same breath. A beggar in the lion's den. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself she'd survive this. That speaking the truth had been the right choice. That's when she saw it. Scratched into the wooden doorframe, barely visible in the flickering torchlight, a symbol. Crude lines forming a circle with a slash through it. A ward sigil she'd seen once before, painted in blood on an alley wall where someone had been murdered. A death mark. Clara's breath froze in her lungs. A soft sound made her turn. Paper sliding under her door. A folded note, sealed with black wax. She didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at her to call the guards, to show them, to prove she wasn't part of whatever conspiracy had poisoned Lucian. But her hands moved anyway, breaking the seal, unfolding the parchment. 5 words, written in elegant script. "Leave before the prince wakes, or be buried with him." Clara didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed clutching the note until dawnlight, what passed for it in Vesperfall's perpetual twilight, crept under her door. The death mark on the doorframe seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision, a warning carved in wood. By the time Elias came to escort her to the infirmary, she'd made a decision. If she was going to die here, she'd die useful. The fortress had transformed overnight into a prison. Guards stationed at every intersection, their armor gleaming like beetles in the torchlight. The great gates sealed with iron bars as thick as Clara's waist. She watched through a corridor window as nobles tried to leave, only to be turned back by soldiers with crossed spears. "Lockdown," Elias said quietly, following her gaze. "No one enters. No one leaves. Not until Lord Alistair finds who did this." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes." His dark eyes slid to her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Clara's hand instinctively touched her pocket, where she'd hidden the note. She should tell him. Should show him the death mark. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and Elias, for all his gentle questions, was still a vampire who'd promised to kill her if she breathed wrong. "I didn't sleep," she said instead. True enough. They found Alistair in the council chamber, a circular room carved from black stone where 7 high-backed chairs surrounded a table inlaid with silver. 5 council members sat rigid as corpses, their ancient faces carefully blank. Marcus stood behind Alistair's chair like an executioner waiting for orders. Alistair's voice was silk over steel. Someone in this fortress brewed Nightgrave essence. Someone with access to the sealed vaults. Someone who knew the prince's routines well enough to administer it without suspicion. His crimson eyes swept the table. That someone is in this room, or serves someone in this room. Preposterous, Councilman Theron snarled, his white beard bristling. "You accuse us of treason based on the ravings of a mortal beggar?" "I accuse no one. Yet." Alistair leaned forward. "But I will tear this stronghold apart stone by stone until I find the truth, starting with everyone who had contact with my son in his final days." That's when Clara was brought forward. She felt every ancient eye fix on her like knives. Councilwoman Verity, sharp-featured and cold. Councilman Raid, broad-shouldered and scarred from old wars. Councilman Theron, who'd already condemned her. 2 others whose names she didn't know, their expressions ranging from disgust to curiosity. "This mortal," Alistair continued, sensed what our healers missed. She identified Nightgrave by name. She will assist in the investigation. She's human filth, Theron spat. She has no place. She has the place I give her. Alistair's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Challenge me again, Theron, and I'll assume you have something to hide. The councilman's mouth snapped shut. Clara's role became horrifyingly clear, bait and bloodhound combined. They brought her to Lucian's chambers, to the dining hall, to every place the prince had been in his final hours. She walked through rooms that smelled of old power and older death, letting that strange sense guide her. In the prince's private dining room, the coldness hit her like a wave. Here, she whispered, her hand hovering over the table. Something died here. Not him, something else. The essence, maybe. The poison has a taste, like ashes and silence. Dorian, who'd been following at a careful distance, stepped forward. Prince Lucian's last meal was taken here, for nights before the funeral. Who was present? Marcus demanded. Only the prince's inner circle. Dorian's jaw tightened. Myself, Elias, Guard Captain Soren, and Councilman Theron, who requested a private audience. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara's hands trembled. One of you poisoned him. Or you're lying to protect the real assassin, Marcus growled, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Less conviction. They returned her to her quarters under Dorian's watch. He stood like a statue outside her door, speaking to no one, his hand never leaving his sword hilt. An hour past midday, a servant arrived with food. Young, nervous, her eyes downcast as she set the tray on the small table. Bread, cheese, dried meat. Water in a clay cup. From the kitchen's miss, the girl murmured before scurrying away. Clara stared at the tray. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since before the funeral, and her body was screaming for sustenance. But that coldness settled in her chest again.
Faint.
Barely there.
Wrong.
She stood abruptly and opened the door. Dorian. The guard turned, his expression irritated. What? The food. Something's wrong with it. You're paranoid. I'm right. Clara pointed at the tray. That same feeling like in the dining hall.
Death.
Please. Dorian's eyes narrowed. He stepped into the room, lifted the cup, sniffed. His expression shifted instantly. Marcus. Elias. Within seconds, both guards arrived. Dorian held up the cup. Blackthorn oil. Enough to stop a mortal heart in minutes. Marcus grabbed Clara's arm, spinning her to face him. Who sent this?
Who are you working with?
No one. Clara tried to pull away. I didn't know, I just felt it. Someone's trying to kill her, Elias said quietly. Someone who wants her silenced before the prince wakes. Or she staged this, Marcus insisted, but his grip loosened slightly. Made it look like an attempt to gain our trust. Then why refuse to eat it? Dorian's voice was sharp. She could have called us after collapsing. Made it more convincing. Marcus released her, his scarred face conflicted. Dorian stood rigid for a long moment, then gave a stiff nod. I apologize for doubting you. The words seemed to cost him something. She's a target now, Elias said, his dark eyes fixed on Clara. They want you gone, which means you're dangerous to them. Or valuable, Marcus muttered, still suspicious but shaken. Where's the servant? Dorian demanded, already moving toward the door. They found her 3 corridors away, dead. Throat cut, eyes open in permanent terror. That night, they brought Clara back to the infirmary. Lucian lay unchanged, his breathing shallow, his skin still that impossible cold not dead temperature. The healers had given up hovering, resigned to watching and waiting. Try, Alistair ordered from the doorway. Touch him. See if your sense reveals anything. Clara approached the stone table slowly. Up close, Lucian looked even more like a sculpture, too perfect, too still. She reached out with trembling fingers and pressed her palm against his wrist. The vision slammed into her. A dining room, torchlight, 4 figures at the table. Lucian laughing at something Dorian said. And then, a hooded figure in the shadows, robes embroidered with council sigils, pouring black liquid into a goblet when no one was looking. Careful.
Practiced.
The liquid vanished into dark wine, like ink in water. The hooded figure turned slightly, and Clara caught a glimpse of a face beneath the cowl. Ancient.
Male.
A white beard. Clara gasped and jerked her hand back. What did you see? Alistair's voice cut through her disorientation. Clara turned to face him, her voice shaking. A councilman. White beard. Council robes. He poisoned the wine. Alistair's expression went utterly cold. Theron. Alistair didn't summon guards to arrest Theron. Not yet. Instead, he dismissed everyone from the infirmary except Clara and led her down corridors she'd never seen, deeper into the fortress, where the walls grew older and the air tasted like centuries. They stopped before a door sealed with blood wards, glowing red sigils that made Clara's teeth ache. Alistair pressed his palm against the stone. The wards hissed and parted like curtains. The Forbidden Archives, he said, his voice echoing in the darkness beyond. Records we keep from the court, from history itself. Inside, shelves stretched into shadows, packed with scrolls and bound volumes that seemed to breathe with age. Alistair moved with purpose, his fingers trailing along spines until he found what he sought, a leather tome so old it cracked when he opened it. He laid it on a stone pedestal and turned pages carefully, almost reverently, then stopped. Clara Bennett, he read aloud. Daughter of Iris Bennett, born 2005, died 2013. His crimson eyes lifted to meet hers. Your mother's name appears in records that predate her birth by 300 years. Clara's breath caught. That's impossible. The Bennett bloodline. Alistair traced a finger down the page, over names written in fading ink. Life bearers. Humans are born with the ability to sense souls between worlds, to reach into death and pull the dying back. He turned the page, revealing an illuminated illustration. A woman with glowing hands pressed against a vampire's chest, light streaming between them. We thought the bloodline was extinct. The last confirmed life-bearer died in 1847, hunted down by vampires who feared her power. His gaze bore into her. Your mother hid you well, kept you off records, let you think you were mad instead of gifted. Gifted. Clara's voice cracked with anger. She let me think I was cursed. I spent 12 years believing I was broken, that the coldness I felt meant something was wrong with me. She kept you alive. Alistair closed the tome with a sound like thunder. If the court had known what you were, they would have taken you as a child, chained you, used you to awaken every vampire on the edge of death, draining you until you had nothing left to give. The words hit Clara like stones. Her mother's delirium suddenly made horrifying sense. They'll call you cursed. They'll call you worse. Why tell me now? Clara demanded. Why show me this? Because my son is dying, and you're the only one who can reach him. Alistair's mask of control cracked, just for a moment, revealing something raw beneath. You're not just a witness anymore, Clara Bennett. You're the key to saving him. And after? Clara's hands clenched into fists. After I save your son, what happens to me? Do I become your tool? Your prisoner? Do I spend the rest of my life reaching death for vampires who see me as nothing but a resource? Alistair said nothing. The silence was enough. They brought her back to the infirmary, but this time, something was different. The moment Clara crossed the threshold, Lucian's fingers twitched. A healer gasped. The prince's chest expanded with a deeper breath, his heart rate spiking on the monitoring crystals that floated above his body. Frost that had gathered on his skin began to melt, water droplets sliding down his pale throat. By the night, one healer whispered, "He's responding to her presence." Alistair's eyes narrowed. "Leave us." The healers fled. Dorian and Marcus, positioned by the door, exchanged glances, but didn't move. Elias watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Sit with him," Alistair ordered. Not a request. Clara approached slowly, her earlier anger warring with something else, a pulse she didn't understand, like a string tied between her ribs and Lucian's still heart. She lowered herself onto the stool beside the stone table, close enough to see the faint movement of his eyes beneath closed lids. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said quietly. Talk to him. Alistair moved to stand at the foot of the table. You reached him once. Do it again. Clara swallowed hard and looked down at Lucian's face. Not a prince. Not a vampire. Just someone trapped between worlds, alone in the dark. Hey, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm Clara. I'm the one who screamed at your funeral.
Sorry about that.
I'm sure it was very dignified before I showed up. Lucian's fingers twitched again, curling slightly. I don't really know why I'm here. Your father thinks I can help you, but I've never helped anyone in my life. I've spent 20 years just trying to survive. She reached out hesitantly, her hand hovering over his. But I felt you. In that casket. And I couldn't walk away. She touched his wrist, and warmth bloomed under her palm. Faint, but real. Lucian's lips parted. His voice came out broken, fragmented, like someone speaking through water. Goblet. Wine couldn't stop him. Clara's heart hammered. Who did this? White beard, council robes. His eyes moved rapidly beneath their lids, lost in memory. Trusted him. Always trusted. Theron, Clara breathed. He poisoned you. Lucian's hand suddenly gripped hers with surprising strength, his eyes opening a fraction. Red irises glowed fever-bright. Don't leave. Stay. I'm here, Clara promised, though she didn't know why. I'm not going anywhere. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go. His breathing steadied, and the cold that had wrapped around him like a shroud seemed to retreat, just slightly, as if her presence alone was holding death at bay. Behind her, she heard Marcus whisper, How is this possible? Life-bearer. Elias answered quietly. She's anchoring his soul. By evening, the entire fortress knew. Clara heard the whispers as guards changed shifts outside her door. Human enchantress. Dark magic. She's bewitched the prince. Servants averted their eyes when she passed. Nobles watched from doorways with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. They think you're dangerous, Dorian said bluntly when he escorted her back to her quarters. That you've cursed the prince somehow. Bound him to you. I didn't do anything, Clara protested. Doesn't matter. The court sees a mortal woman who can control a vampire prince with a touch. They're terrified. And terrified nobles, Clara was learning, were dangerous nobles. She was preparing for sleep, or trying to, when Alistair appeared in her doorway without knocking. His expression was granite. The council met tonight, in my absence. His voice carried an edge that could cut stone. They've drafted a petition. 32 signatures. They're demanding your public execution at dawn. Clara's blood turned to ice.
What?
They claim you violated ancient law, used dark magic to defile royal death rites, enchanted the air. Alistair's jaw clenched. They're calling it an act of war against the throne. That's insane, Clara whispered. I saved him. I know. For the first time, Alistair looked tired. Ancient. But they have the law on their side. And I have a kingdom that's ready to tear itself apart. If I refuse, they'll call it tyranny. They'll say I've been compromised. Clara's legs gave out. She sat heavily on the bed, her mind spinning. So what? You're just going to let them kill me? After everything? Alistair was silent for a long moment. There's one law older than their petition, he said finally. A king's right to trial by testimony. If the accused can produce evidence of innocence before the assembled court, execution can be delayed. How long? 24 hours. His crimson eyes burned into hers. You have until tomorrow's sunset to prove Theron guilty. If you fail, he didn't need to finish. At dawn, Clara would burn. The great hall had been built to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness 40 feet above. Columns carved with the history of vampire conquest lined both sides. At the far end, 7 thrones sat elevated on a dais, the council's seats of judgment. Behind them, Lord Alistair's throne rose highest, black iron shaped like a crown of thorns. 300 vampires packed the hall, their eyes glowing like coals in the torchlight. The air vibrated with hunger and anticipation. They'd come to watch justice. They'd come to watch death. Clara was dragged in by 2 guards, her wrists bound with iron that burned against her skin. They forced her to her knees in the center of the hall, on a circle of stones stained dark with old blood. Above her head, chains hung from the ceiling, waiting. The council entered in procession, their ceremonial robes trailing behind them like shadows. Councilwoman Verity, Councilman Raid, others whose names Clara didn't know, and Theron, his white beard immaculate, his ancient face arranged in righteous fury. He looked at Clara like she was something scraped off his boot. Alistair took his throne last, moving with deliberate slowness. He didn't look at Clara, didn't acknowledge her at all. His face was carved from ice. Clara Bennett, Theron's voice boomed across the hall. You stand accused of violating sacred death rites, of using dark magic to defile the prince's funeral, of enchanting the royal air for your own gain. He paused, letting the charges sink in. The penalty is death by sunlight. Do you confess?
No.
Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I confess to nothing but saving a life. Lies. A noble shouted from the crowd. Human witch. She bewitched him, another voice cried. The prince speaks her name, even in death sleep. The hall erupted in anger. Fists pounded on stone. Demands for blood echoed off the walls. Silence. Alistair's single word cut through the chaos like a blade. The hall fell quiet instantly, fear trumping rage. The accused has invoked the right to testimony. She will speak. My lord, Theron interjected smoothly. The law is clear. Dark magic used against the royal family demands immediate. I know the law, Theron. I wrote half of it. Alistair's crimson eyes fixed on the councilman. She will speak. Unless you wish to challenge my authority before the assembled court. Theron's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Of course not, my lord. Movement near the dais caught Clara's attention. The three elite guards stood in a line, their expressions conflicted. Dorian stepped forward first, his voice formal and rigid. By law, the accused interrupted a sacred rite. By law, she should face consequences. But he hesitated, the words clearly costing him. She also identified poison our healers missed. Save the prince from being buried alive. Justice demands we weigh both truths. Justice demands we weigh the threat, Marcus growled, his scarred face dark. She's a life-bearer. Do you understand what that means? She can reach into death itself, control vampire souls. She's more dangerous than 100 assassins. She's also the only witness who can identify the real traitor, Elias said quietly, his dark eyes sweeping the council. Kill her now, and whoever poisoned Prince Lucian walks free. Is that justice? The girl is a distraction, Councilwoman Verity said coldly. A human who got lucky, and now the kingdom tears itself apart debating her fate. Execute her and restore order. Order built on murdering an innocent. Alistair's voice dropped to something lethal. That's not the order. That's cowardice. The hall went utterly silent. The prince lives because of her, Alistair continued, standing from his throne. Someone in this fortress tried to bury my son alive. Someone used Nightgrave essence, a poison that requires blood-sealed vaults and forbidden knowledge. Someone in this room is a traitor. Preposterous, Theron blustered. You believe the ravings of a... The doors to the great hall burst open. Healers rushed in, their faces panicked. My lord, the prince, he's waking. A surge of power rippled through the fortress, like thunder. Every torch in the hall flared white-hot. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Clara felt it in her chest. That pull, that connection, stronger than before. Lucian was calling her. And then he was there. Marcus and two healers carried him in, his body rigid with effort, his eyes blazing red. He shouldn't be conscious, shouldn't be able to move. But he pushed against their grip with sudden, desperate strength. Do not touch her. His voice cracked like breaking stone, but it carried across the entire hall. 300 vampires froze. Lucian's eyes found Clara kneeling in the circle, bound and bleeding. His face twisted with rage.
Let her
go. My prince, Theron said quickly, his voice stripping false concern. You're not well. You don't understand what she's. I understand she saved my life. Lucian swayed on his feet, barely able to stand, but his authority filled the room. And I understand someone poisoned me. Someone I trusted. Clara watched Theron's face, watched the micro-expressions he couldn't quite control. The way his eyes widened just slightly. The way his hand trembled before he clenched it into a fist.
Fear.
He was afraid. The poison was Nightgrave essence, Clara said loudly, her voice ringing clear. Forbidden. Requires access to blood-sealed vaults. It was administered during Prince Lucian's last meal, 4 nights before the funeral. Half the hall gasped. For people were present, she continued, her eyes locked on Theron. 3 guards. And 1 councilman who requested a private audience. Who poured black liquid into dark wine when no one was watching. She's lying. Theron roared, but his voice cracked. This is desperation invention. I saw it, Clara said. I touched the prince and saw the memory. You poisoned him, Councilman Theron. You tried to bury him alive. Lies. Theron surged to his feet, his composure shattering. I have served this house for 2 centuries. I would never. Then submit to a blood truth ritual, Alistair said softly. If you're innocent, the magic will prove it. Theron's face went gray. Blood truth couldn't be deceived.
Couldn't be fooled.
It would strip away every lie, every secret, every. I demand time to prepare my defense. You demand nothing. Alistair descended from the dais like death itself.
Guards.
Detain him. Theron moved faster than Clara thought possible. He threw his hand forward, and shadows exploded from his palm, slamming into the guards nearest him. Dark magic, forbidden magic. You stupid, blind fool. Theron snarled at Alistair. You think you can hold this kingdom with mercy? With weakness? Your son was a mistake waiting to happen, and you. He didn't finish. Dorian's sword took him through the shoulder, spinning him around. Marcus's blade followed, pinning his other arm. But Theron was laughing, blood on his teeth. You think I'm alone? You think this ends with me? His eyes swept the crowd. Half this court wants you gone, Alistair. I'm just the one who has the spine to act. Then he bit down on something hidden in his mouth. Poison. Fast-acting. His body convulsed once, twice, then went limp.
Dead.
The hall erupted into chaos. They released Clara from her bonds, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were on Lucian, who'd collapsed the moment Theron died, his brief strength exhausted. The healers surrounded him again, carrying him back toward the infirmary. Half the court, Elias murmured beside her. He said half the court wants Alistair gone. Meaning there are more traitors, Dorian finished grimly. This isn't over. Clara's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd won the trial. Exposed Theron.
Survived.
But as she looked around the great hall at the faces watching her, some grateful, some resentful, some calculating, she realized something terrible. She wasn't safe. She'd never be safe. Not while half a conspiracy still breathed. That night, exhaustion dragged Clara under despite her fear. She didn't hear her door open. Didn't hear the footsteps until hands grabbed her, pulling a hood over her head. She tried to scream, but cloth stuffed into her mouth silenced her. Quietly now, a voice hissed. Or we open your throat right here. They dragged her from the bed, bound her wrists with practiced efficiency. Clara fought, but there were too many of them.
4.
Maybe 5. Their faces hidden behind masks, their movements coordinated. Thralls. Mind-controlled servants. They pulled her into the corridor, past her posted guard, who stood frozen, eyes glazed, clearly under the same compulsion. Down the stairs, toward the lower levels where even torchlight struggled to reach. Toward the crypts. Toward silence. Toward death. The thralls dragged Clara down 3 flights of stone stairs, her bare feet scraping against steps worn smooth by centuries. The air grew colder, damper, thick with the smell of earth and old death. They were taking her deep. Too deep for screams to carry. Too deep for anyone to find her before it was too late. Then steel rang against stone somewhere above them. The thralls froze. One cocked his head, listening, his glazed eyes flickering with confusion as the compulsion warred against self-preservation instinct. "Move," the lead thrall hissed, yanking Clara forward. They turned a corner into a narrow corridor and ran straight into Marcus Crow. The scarred guard stood alone in the passageway, his sword already drawn, his expression carved from violence. For one suspended moment, no one moved. Then Marcus attacked. He moved like a storm, his blade opening the first thrall's throat before the man could react. The others released Clara and drew weapons, short blades, garrotes, tools meant for silent killing. They came at Marcus from three sides. Clara stumbled backward, her bound hands useless, the cloth gag choking her. She watched Marcus fight with brutal efficiency, each strike calculated, each movement precise. But there were too many. A blade sliced across his ribs. Another caught his shoulder. Then Dorian and Elias burst into the corridor from behind the thralls. The battle turned into butchery. Dorian's sword took a thrall through the spine. Elias moved like smoke, his blade finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. Within seconds, four bodies lay bleeding on the stone. The fifth thrall, the leader, grabbed Clara by the throat, his knife pressed against her jugular. "Back, or she dies." Marcus went utterly still, his sword raised, blood dripping from the blade. His eyes locked on Clara's face, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. Fear. "Let her go," he said quietly. "You're already dead. Make it quick, or make it slow." The thrall's hand trembled. The compulsion was breaking, Clara realized, fighting against his survival instinct, his sense of self. His eyes flickered between glazed and clear. "I can't. They'll kill my family. I have to." Elias's blade punched through his back and out his chest. The thrall dropped, the knife clattering harmlessly away. Clara collapsed to her knees, gasping around the gag. Marcus was there instantly, pulling the cloth from her mouth, cutting her bonds with hands that shook slightly. "You're bleeding," Clara managed, staring at the wound across his ribs. "I'm fine." But his voice was rough. "I thought, when I saw your room empty, someone sent them." Clara struggled to her feet, her legs trembling. "Someone who knew exactly where I'd be. Someone inside the fortress." "Theron's co-conspirators," Dorian said grimly, cleaning his blade. "They're still out there." "Then we end this," Clara said.
Now.
Before they try again. Alistair was in the council chamber with the remaining council members when Clara burst in, flanked by the three guards. Blood still stained Marcus's armor. Elias had a cut above his eye. Dorian's expression promised violence. The council members turned, Verity, Raid, and two others. And there, standing near the window with his back to the room, was Councilman Severus Grey. Tall, thin, his dark hair streaked with silver. He turned slowly, his expression mild curiosity. Clara felt the coldness slam into her chest.
Death.
The same signature she'd felt on Lucian. On the poisoned cup. On the thralls. "Her," Clara said, pointing directly at Grey. Then corrected herself, her voice sharp with certainty.
Him.
"Councilman Grey. He's part of it." Grey's eyebrows rose. Bold accusation from a mortal who's already caused one council member's death. "The goblet," Clara continued, her words coming faster now. "Theron poured the poison, but you brewed it. I can feel your signature on it. Like ash and silence and," she searched for words, "old, patient hatred." "The girl is traumatized," Verity said dismissively. "She nearly died tonight. She's seeing conspiracies everywhere." "She's right." Alistair's voice was cold as winter. "I've suspected Grey for days." Theron was loud, obviously. "But you," his crimson eyes fixed on the councilman, "you were always the quiet one. The patient one. The one who whispered in Theron's ear." Grey smiled. It was a terrible expression, empty of humor. "Finally," he said softly. "Finally you see it. Do you know how exhausting it's been, Alistair? Watching you drag this kingdom toward weakness? 3 centuries of strength, of fear, of respect. And you want to soften us. Make us civilized. You try to kill my son," Alistair said, his voice dropping to something lethal. Your son was weak. Gray's composure cracked like ice, soft-hearted, merciful. He would have destroyed everything our kind built. So yes, I brewed the night grave. Yes, I gave it to Theron. Yes, I plan to bury Lucian alive and watch this kingdom remember what it means to be vampire. The chamber erupted. Raid surged to his feet. Verity backed away, her face shocked. The guards moved to surround Gray. But Gray was already moving. He pulled a blade from his robes, obsidian, carved with runes that pulsed with dark light. A cursed blade. He lunged for Clara, with speed that blurred. Dorian intercepted, his sword meeting the cursed blade with a sound like breaking glass. Sparks flew. The impact drove Dorian back a step, his arms trembling with effort. Gray pressed forward, his face twisted with rage. You should have died in that alley, life-bearer. Should have stayed forgotten. Elias appeared from Gray's blind side, his blade slicing across the councilman's sword arm. Gray hissed in pain, spinning away. Marcus moved to block the exit, his weapon raised. They had him cornered. Gray laughed, high, unhinged. You think you've won? You think killing me ends this? He slammed his bleeding hand against the floor. Dark magic exploded outward, a shockwave that sent the guards stumbling. When Clara's vision cleared, Gray was gone, melted into shadows, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. This was always bigger than me, bigger than Theron. We are Legion, Alistair, and we're already at your gates. The words hung in the air like poison. Then the fortress bells began to scream. Not the measured tolling of ceremony, the frantic, desperate clanging of alarm.
Attack.
Invasion.
War.
Alistair ran for the window. The others followed. Clara pushed between them to see. In the darkness beyond the stronghold walls, torches moved through the forest.
Hundreds of them.
Thousands. An army approaching in the night, their flames reflecting off armor and drawn steel. Thralls, Marcus breathed. An entire army of thralls. And rogue vampires, Dorian added, his voice tight. I see house banners. Gray wasn't lying. He has support. The torches kept coming, spreading across the valley like a plague of fireflies. The drumbeat of marching feet echoed off the mountains. Alistair's hand clenched on the windowsill hard enough to crack stone. Sound the defense, he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. Every guard to the walls. Seal the gates. Wake every warrior in this fortress. He turned to Clara, and for the first time she saw something like fear in his ancient eyes. They're coming for my son, and they're coming for you. Outside, war drums began to thunder. The siege had begun. The first ward shattered at midnight. Clara felt it like a physical blow, a snapping of invisible strings that had held for centuries, protections older than memory breaking under coordinated assault. The fortress trembled. Dust rained from ancient stones. Somewhere in the depths, vampires screamed battle cries. Get her to the inner sanctum, Alistair commanded, already moving toward the ramparts. His voice carried absolute authority even as chaos erupted around them. Protect the prince. Protect her. But Clara was already running, not away from the battle.
Toward it.
Toward the infirmary where Lucian lay vulnerable, barely conscious, trapped in that terrible space between life and death. If Gray's forces reached him, if they finished what they'd started, Clara, wait. Elias materialized from shadows, grabbing her arm. You can't. I'm not hiding, she snarled, yanking free. They're coming for him. I'm not letting them finish this. Outside, the sounds of war intensified. Steel on steel. Screams. The wet sounds of bodies hitting stone. The Thrall army crashed against the fortress walls like a tide, their faces blank, their movements coordinated by magic they couldn't resist. And among them, rogue vampires, council members' sons, disgraced warriors, nobles who'd grown tired of Alistair's rule. They fought with centuries of skill and hatred in their hearts. Dorian stood on the main rampart, his voice cutting through chaos as he directed defenders with tactical precision. Archers to the east wall. Reinforce the gate. Hold the courtyard at all costs. Marcus fought on the front line, his sword painting arcs of blood in the torchlight. He moved like brutality given form, each strike calculated to maim, to kill, to terrify. Thralls fell before him in heaps, but more kept coming. Always more. Clara reached the infirmary with Elias at her heels. For guards stood outside Lucian's chamber, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. They nodded as she passed. Her presence had become familiar, expected even. The mortal girl who'd saved the prince. Inside, Lucian lay as she'd left him.
Pale.
Still. Frost gathering on his skin again, despite the warmth of the room. His breathing had grown shallower in the hours since the trial, as if Gray's escape had somehow weakened him further. "Stay with him," Elias said, positioning himself by the door. "I'll guard the entrance." Clara moved to Lucian's side, her hand finding his. Cold. Too cold. That pull between them felt stretched thin, fraying like an overtaxed rope. "Hold on," she whispered.
Please.
"Just hold on." An explosion rocked the fortress. The wards on the inner sanctum shattering. Clara heard boots in the corridor. Fighting. Steel meeting steel. Then screaming. The guards outside Lucian's chamber were dying. Elias moved instantly, disappearing into shadows. Clara heard him engage the attackers beyond the door, heard his blade finding flesh. But the sounds were wrong. Too many footsteps. Too many weapons. The door burst open. 5 figures in dark armor poured through. Not thralls. These were rogue vampires, their eyes blazing with battle lust, their movements too fast to track. Elias fought desperately at the threshold, his blade a blur, but one attacker got past him. Then another. Clara grabbed the only weapon within reach, a heavy iron bar meant for tending the infirmary's central brazier. She swung it with everything she had, catching the first attacker across the temple. He staggered, more surprised than hurt. The second vampire laughed, a cold sound like breaking ice. The life-bearer fights. How quaint. He moved like lightning. His hand closed around Clara's throat, lifting her off the ground. The iron bar clattered away. She clawed at his grip, her vision darkening, lungs screaming. Behind the attacking vampires, she saw Elias go down, outnumbered, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Saw more assassins pouring into the chamber. Saw one approach Lucian's table with a cursed blade raised.
No.
The word echoed through Clara's mind with desperate force. She felt Lucian's soul flickering like a candle in a storm, felt the darkness pulling him down, felt death reaching for him with patient, hungry hands.
No.
Something inside Clara's chest erupted. Light blazed from her hands, pure, white, searing. Not fire. Life itself, raw and undiluted. It burned through the vampire, holding her throat. He screamed and released her, stumbling backward as his flesh began to smoke. Clara hit the ground gasping. The light kept coming, pouring from her palms in threads like liquid silver. It spread across the chamber floor, crawling up the walls, wrapping around the attacking vampires. They shrieked and tried to flee, but the light caught them, burned them, reduced them to ash in seconds. The thralls in the doorway collapsed, their compulsions shattered by the wave of life magic. Clara didn't understand what she was doing, couldn't control it. The power flowed from some deep well inside her that she'd never known existed, channeled by terror and desperation and that fierce, unshakable certainty. He will not die. Not tonight. Not ever. She turned to Lucian. His soul was fading. She could feel it slipping away, drawn toward that cold silence that meant the end. Clara threw herself toward the stone table, pressing both hands against his chest, pouring everything she had into him. "Come back," she commanded, her voice cracking with effort. "Lucian, come back." Light flooded from her palms into his body. She felt it travel through his veins like rivers of fire, burning away the last traces of night-grave poison, shattering the stasis that held him. His heart stuttered, stopped, then beat, strong and sure. Lucian's eyes snapped open. Red. Blazing. Fully conscious. He sucked in a breath that sounded like a roar, his back arching off the table. Magic exploded from him. Ancient, powerful, furious. The remaining attackers in the corridor froze as Lucian's power wrapped around them like chains. He sat up slowly, his gaze sweeping the chamber, taking in the bodies, the ash. Clara kneeling beside him, her hands still glowing faintly. More vampires rushed through the door, weapons raised. Lucian raised one hand almost lazily. They collapsed, not dead, but drained, their magic, their strength, their will to fight pulled from them like water from a well. Lucian fed on it, not their blood, drawing power from the very thing that made them vampire. Within seconds, a dozen attackers lay unconscious on the floor. The chamber fell silent except for Clara's ragged breathing. Lucian turned to her, really looked at her for the first time. His red eyes tracked the blood on her throat, the bruises forming where she'd been grabbed, the way her entire body trembled with exhaustion. "You brought me back," he said quietly. His voice was different now, stronger, clearer, resonant with power that had been absent before. "Pulled me from death itself." Clara tried to speak, but couldn't find words. Lucian reached out slowly, his hand cupping her face with shocking gentleness. His touch was cold, but no longer corpse cold. Living cold. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "By ancient law," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers, "the life you gave binds your soul to mine. We are connected now, Clara Bennett. Tied together by magic older than this kingdom." "What does that mean?" Clara whispered. Lucian's expression was unreadable, somewhere between gratitude and something deeper, more complicated. "It means wherever you go, I'll feel you. Whatever threatens you, I'll know." His hand dropped from her face. "It means you're no longer just Clara. You're mine to protect, mine to defend. And if I don't want to be yours?" Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Then we'll both spend eternity fighting the bond. But it won't change the truth." Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. Victory cries echoed through the fortress. The siege was breaking. But as Lucian helped Clara to her feet, his hand steady on her arm, she realized the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Dawn came to Vesperfall like a rumor. Not true sunlight, but the faint gray promise of it bleeding through perpetual clouds. Clara stood in the courtyard where she'd crashed a funeral that felt like years ago rather than days, watching ash drift like snow across blood-stained stones. Bodies littered the ground. Thralls mostly, their blank faces finally at peace in death. A few rogue vampires who'd chosen the wrong side, their bodies already decaying to dust. The fortress walls bore scars, cracked stone, shattered wards, scorch marks from magic that had burned too hot. Survivors moved through the carnage like ghosts. Healers tended wounded. Guards dragged prisoners toward the cells. Nobles stood in clusters, their carefully constructed masks cracked, showing fear and uncertainty beneath. Clara's hands still tingled with residual power. Her whole body ached like she'd been beaten, every muscle screaming. But she was alive. Lucian was alive. They'd won. Lucian stood beside her, fully dressed now in formal black, the silver crown of the heir returned to his head. He looked like a prince again, powerful, intimidating, untouchable. But his hand rested lightly on Clara's shoulder, a point of connection he didn't bother to hide. "They're waiting," he said quietly. Clara nodded. She knew. The Great Hall. The final reckoning. The hall was packed again, but the atmosphere had transformed. The bloodlust was gone, replaced by exhausted wariness. 300 vampires who'd watched their kingdom nearly tear itself apart, who'd fought their own kind in corridors they'd walked for centuries. The remaining council members sat in their thrones, their faces carefully neutral. Verity looked older somehow, diminished. Raid's warrior bearing had cracked, showing vulnerability beneath. 2 empty thrones loomed like accusations, Theron's and Grey's. Lord Alistair stood before his throne, not sitting. A king addressing his people, not judging from on high. Guards dragged in the captured conspirators. 17 vampires in chains, their armor stripped, their faces showing various degrees of defiance and terror. Councilman Grey was among them, his wounded arm bound, his expression venomous. And behind them, 34 thralls, humans who'd been compelled, their eyes clearing now, confusion and horror replacing the blank obedience. Severus Grey. Alistair's voice carried across the hall like a death knell. You stand convicted of high treason, of poisoning the royal air, of conspiracy to overthrow the throne, of leading an armed assault against this stronghold. Grey spat blood at Alistair's feet. Convicted by whose law? Yours? The same law that's made us weak. His wild eyes swept the hall. I tried to save us, tried to return us to strength. And you, he turned his hatred on Clara, you and your human pet have destroyed 3 centuries of order. Order? Lucian's voice cut through the tirade. He descended from the dais with predatory grace, his red eyes blazing. You call an attempted murder order? You call burying me alive strength? He stopped directly in front of Grey, close enough to strike. You're not a patriot, Grey. You're a coward who poisoned wine rather than challenge me face to face. Grey's composure finally shattered. You're too soft, just like your father. This kingdom, Alistair interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal, needs traitors removed. Silence fell like an axe. Severus Grey, you are hereby sentenced to eternal banishment. You will be sealed in stone and cast into the sunless deep, where you will remain conscious but immobile for the rest of time. Alistair's expression was carved from ice. A mercy, considering what you've done. Grey's face went white. Eternal banishment was worse than death, conscious forever in darkness, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. The same sentence applies to all who knowingly joined his conspiracy, Alistair continued. As for the thralls, his gaze softened fractionally. You acted under compulsion. You are pardoned and free to leave with compensation for your suffering. The thralls collapsed in relief. Several wept. Guards began dragging the conspirators away. Grey fought his chains, screaming curses, promises of vengeance, prophecies of doom. His voice echoed until the great doors slammed shut behind him. Then Lucian turned to face the assembled court. Clara Bennett saved my life, he said clearly. She alone sensed poison our healers missed. She alone stopped my burial. She alone awakened me from death sleep when the kingdom needed it most. He held out his hand to Clara. After moments' hesitation, she took it. He pulled her forward to stand beside him before 300 watching vampires. By ancient law, the life she gave binds her to my soul. By my will, I declare her life-bearer of the Vesper dynasty. His voice rang with absolute authority. She is under my protection. Under my father's protection. To harm her is to harm me. To threaten her is treason against the crown itself. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked. Some were outraged. But most simply looked exhausted. Too tired to fight another battle. Too broken to resist. Kneel, Lucian commanded. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dorian Hale stepped forward. The rigid, duty-bound guard who'd wanted Clara executed days ago. He lowered himself to one knee before her, his head bowed. Life-bearer, he said formally. I pledge my blade to your defense. I was wrong to doubt you. I won't make that mistake again. Marcus Crowe followed, his scarred face showing something like respect. You fight like a warrior, even though you're mortal. Even though you had every reason to run. He knelt. You have my loyalty, my sword, my life if you need it. Elias Thorne was last, moving with that characteristic grace. He knelt smoothly, but when he looked up at Clara, there was something almost knowing in his dark eyes. A faint smile. I knew, he said quietly, from the moment you screamed at the funeral. You were exactly what this kingdom needed. One by one, the rest of the hall followed. Nobles, warriors, council members. Even ancient vampires who'd stood in these halls for centuries lowered themselves before a 20-year-old homeless girl who'd crashed a funeral and changed everything. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not from joy. From the weight of it. The impossibility. She wasn't homeless anymore. Wasn't invisible. It wasn't free. But she'd chosen this, hadn't she? When she'd thrown herself between that casket and the guards. When she'd refused to let them bury someone alive. When she'd pulled Lucian back from death with power she didn't understand. She'd chosen to matter,
To be seen.
to save a life. And now she'd have to live with the consequences. Alistair approached, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Clara thought he might challenge Lucian's declaration, assert his authority as king. Instead, he inclined his head. Not quite a bow, but acknowledgement. "Welcome to the family," he said quietly. "May the night have mercy on us both." They stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard as the sun set, or what passed for sunset in Vesperfall's eternal twilight. Clara watched the survivors below begin the work of rebuilding, repairing walls, clearing bodies, returning to the rhythms of life. Lucian stood beside her, his presence a constant warmth at her side despite the coldness of his skin. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Saving me?" Clara thought about it, about the fear and the pain and the impossible choices, about the bond that tied them together now, whether she wanted it or not. "No," she said finally. "I regret a lot of things, but not that." Lucian smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine.
Good.
"Because I intend to make your life extremely complicated from here on out. More complicated than it already is? Much more." Clara laughed despite everything. It felt strange, foreign, but good. Below, in the crowd of survivors, a figure in a dark cloak watched them. His face was hidden, but his posture radiated patient malice. He stood perfectly still while chaos moved around him, his gaze fixed on the balcony, on Clara. Then he turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing like smoke. A message, a promise. The conspiracy wasn't finished. Gray had been one head of a hydra, and somewhere in the darkness, other heads were stirring. But Clara was no longer the frightened girl who'd crashed a funeral. She was the life-bearer, bound to a vampire prince, protected by a kingdom, hunted by enemies she couldn't yet name.
And she was ready.
"Let them come," she whispered, watching the darkness where the figure had vanished. Lucian heard her. His hand found hers, cold fingers interlacing with warm. "Let them come," he agreed. Above them, the first stars emerged through Vesperfall's eternal clouds, pinpricks of light in the darkness, watching, waiting. The story was just beginning.